Welcome back, you filthy exiles. Alright, so we're doing a second build for this league, and we decided to pick something that is completely bizarre and completely out of the ordinary that probably nobody else is playing. In fact, I think the statistic when I checked was 0.05 people were playing this build, but as we can see, I'm running a surrender shield here. We'll just turn off these global comments for the moment. Now, this shield is really interesting because it lets us do something that no other shield in the game lets us do effectively, and that's run level 30 Reckoning. And so that's what our build is. And you would have seen some videos leading up to this essentially where I've been mucking around with the Reckoning build. But basically we're running a max block Gladiator. And when I say max block, I think the highest amount of maximum peak block that we can get without running an anvil necklace is 79%. So we've only got a 21% chance of getting hit. And even with an Abyssus, and obviously Abyssus is giving us 43% increased physical damage taken, we've managed to get up to 90% physical damage reduction. And I'll explain in this build how I've done it. I should probably also add that our Reckoning triggers has a cooldown reduction of 50%. So essentially our Reckoning is triggering a ridiculous amount of times. It's got on a 0.27 second cooldown, which basically means I'm constantly blocking everything. Now the DPS that I've clocked so far is Reckoning is hitting up at 1.5 million Shaper DPS, and that's on top of also having a 6-link Cyclone kit out, which is also hitting at about 2.5 mil, and Val Cyclone hits at about 3.2 mil Shaper DPS. So this is doing some decent DPS, at least for T16 mapping. It's quite safe. There are some things such as dot, things like that really fuck this build up. Dot is basically our enemy, and the same goes with physical damage reflect. Pretty much if we reflect one of our Reckoning shield blows, that's instant death for us. And I should also point out that we're only running with 4000 HP, and we can do, so far I think I've done T7 Awakener with this character. I had a few deaths in that, and I'm not saying that this character will run deathless, but this character will definitely go toe-to-toe. I think the only two bosses that I've really had any real issues with is Cortex, which that's another story where I pissed nearly 10x down the drain, and pretty much at Siri, and even basic at Siri, and that's because of the damage reflect that she does. Aside from that, I've had no problem clearing anything else. Now, there's a few other mechanics that are going on here. Obviously, you can see that we do not run a weapon because weapons are for sooks. No, this is actually a Facebreaker build. So we've managed to get this working with the Facebreaker strap mitts. We've actually managed to get a pair of corrupted Facebreakers that gives us +2 to all our aura gems, as you can see here, +2 to everything. Precision, and obviously Herald of Purity is not an aura. And also Flesh and Stone. And what you'll also notice is this is a heavy crit reliant build. So our critical strike, if we have a look at offense, we also have essentially without running unwavering. I think it's unwavering. Let's have a look at that. Resolute technique, that's what we're looking at. Without running Resolute Technique, we're hitting 100%, so our accuracy is maxed out. Our crit before any buff is 41%, and this goes up to about 70 to 75% effective crit chance. You'll see it in the POB. And our crit multi will actually top out at about, 528% crit multi. So our critical strikes are absolutely devastating. Now, on top of that, we're also doing Cyclone, and we're also hitting enemies with an Impale. We're also maiming enemies, and you would have seen in the B-roll some pretty crazy shit. Now, for a Cyclone character that runs Facebreakers, this is quite a good character. That is not without the cost. So I think I clock in currently about 70x worth of investment, maybe somewhere around that, maybe not that much, but essentially our 2 rings here are about 10x a piece, and obviously we have channeling of 1 mana cost for our cyclone, so it's basically free. I think the surrender was about 1.3x when I bought it. My boots were probably 80k, I'll say, not much. My belt was 4x, and the reason why is we have 20% cooldown on this belt, and it's obviously a shaped belt in order to get that. Facebreakers is not so expensive. I think this was about 1x or 2x, and that's because of the aura corrupt and also being 793%. This Abyssus cost 15x because there were only 2 on the market. One was selling for 30 and one was selling for 10, and the dude who was selling for 10 did not want to sell for 10. So yeah, this was a pain in the butt. And also we're running a 6-link Crashian Carpus as well, and that's because this build actually uses Aspect of the Crab, which I have always wanted to run and have never had a reason to run it. So yes, and also this is immune to bleed, so we do not die to bleed, which was a huge problem with the Abyssus. And then finally our Ridgewald's Curse, that was like 30 or 40 chaos. And the reason why we use this, and the reason why this is significant for unarmed builds, pardon me, is the critical strike chance that scales off of claw crit chance, and that basically buffs us up quite drastically. All in all, oh yeah, and I should probably add that we actually run an Intuitive Leap on this build as well. We do have Corrupted Blood immunity. I think I have Corrupted Blood immunity. I do. And also we take advantage of all of the new notables, which we'll go into further in the guide. And we also run a split personality, and that's how we can sustain 12 mana. Anyway, let's get into the build. Okay, so the first part of this build will be the key uniques. Now, the first thing that we're running here is an Abyssus Enzomite Burgeonet. Now, the one that we're running has 30% increased reckoning cooldown recovery speed. Now, that is a little bit of a difficult enchant to get on this, but by all means, if you can get it, that's going to make this build pop off a lot. Alternatively, we'll talk about the belt very briefly and how cooldown reduction works. So essentially what this does is it gives you an increased melee critical strike multiplier and 40 to 60 physical damage to attacks. Now this scales off of what we'll talk about soon, being the Facebreakers. But essentially you'll get a multiplier based on your Facebreaker physical damage increase while unarmed, applied to that 40 to 60% physical damage to attacks. So it's quite significant. The caveat of using this will be you have a 40 to 50% increased physical damage taken downside. Now this will be negated by the next piece of armor that we'll talk about, which is the Crashian Carpus. Now I've always been wanting to play a build that uses this, but I could never figure out what type of build is going to use this. In this particular build, it works fantastically. Now, as far as what I can tell, bleed damage to this build is it's absolute kryptonite, simply on the basis that I believe there may be some element of physical damage that's applied from bleed, which makes it basically chew through you like butter, a hot knife in butter. Now, the Carpus actually stops this because now bleeding cannot be inflicted on us. What it also gives us is a huge amount of health, and in fact the one that's in my POB that I'll put in the description hasn't even got a max health roll, which can go up to 120. It gives us fire and cold resist up to 30%, so that's also good. Gives us nearly 2,500 armor, which is great, and it also gives us crab barriers, which increases our physical damage, I believe, by 2% per crab barrier, and we have 15 crab barriers. So we have a 30% reduction to damage by default using Aspect of the Crab, which reserves 25% mana. This is an incredibly good piece of chest armor for this build, and I would definitely recommend. And finally, the last unique, and that's obviously we'll get into the boots and belt after this, will be the Facebreakers. So you don't need a corrupted roll for these Facebreakers. This is just the roll that I've got. Facebreakers are incredibly cheap. 30 chaos or whatnot for a decent roll. You want to try and get as close to 800% as you can with Facebreakers. But essentially what this does is it scales up any flat damage that you stack on your build by the percentage more physical damage with unarmed attacks roll on it. So as long as you're not running a weapon, and that doesn't count for shields, as long as you're not running a weapon, it scales up your damage base by the percentage that are on the gloves. That's essentially what makes Facebreaker builds so damn powerful. And there's a lot less min-maxing that's required using Facebreakers than what can be from using weapons, surprisingly. It's quite a simple item to use if you know how to use it. Now, boots, I'm just running some shark skin boots that give me all resist and 30% movement speed and health. And that's pretty... Oh, and sorry, our belt is also significant. So we're running a rustic stash, you'll see it in the POB. But essentially, our biggest thing there is cooldown recovery speed. Now, the way that Reckoning works is it works off of ticks. So what we have to do, or server ticks. So what we need to do is essentially reduce the amount of time or delay it takes for our Reckoning to proc. And the way that we do that is by maxing out cooldown. So with the combination of our Abyssus Helm enchant and also our belt, we have 50% cooldown on Reckoning, which makes it quite powerful. So pretty much the pièce de résistance of this build is this one single shield, which is actually only worth about 70 to 80 chaos from what I've looked at now in the league. This grants us level 30 Reckoning, and a level 30 skill, if you didn't know, is incredibly powerful. Not only does this give us Reckoning, and it essentially gives us a technical 6 link with a 3 link, or a 4 link if you want to call it, whatever you want to call it. It gives us 250 life when we block as well, so we get a shit ton of life back every time we block, and if we're blocking every 0.27 seconds at a 79% chance to block, it's quite a good rate of block. Not only that, we get 1352 armor on the roll that I've got. We have 30% chance to block just off this shield because it gives us an additional 6% chance to block, and it also gives us 1500 armor if you've blocked recently. So if you're always blocking, you're always going to have additional armor. And essentially, this is what makes this build work. This shield, you can try and run this build with other shields. I wouldn't suggest that this shield is simply unbeatable if you're running a Reckoning build. And also lets you run a 6-link Cyclone in the process of that as well. So the next items that we have at our disposal in this build, and the ones that are quite significant and in fact quite expensive, are our talisman or amulet and our 2 rings. So I haven't got the rings specifically up on screen right now, but I'll go into the I'll dig into what makes those so special in a moment. So pretty much the key thing here that all unarmed builds must run is Ridgewald's Curse Were Claw Talisman. And the reason why is more so, well, it gives us global critical strike multiplier, but the biggest and most significant part of this is the last modifier, which is modifiers to claw critical strike chance also apply to unarmed critical strike chance. This is significant in a build that we are stacking Facebreakers on, because essentially any application of critical strike to what would be deemed as claw damage is extrapolated across our build. So if you actually take this off in the POB, you'll notice that the DPS drops by 50%. So this single amulet is what makes Facebreaker work. Now, it is a bit annoying we can't anoint this because they come pre-corrupted, or they drop pre-corrupted. And I've seen in the forums and whatnot, there's discussion around permitting anoints to corrupted amulets, because that would basically make this build impossibly ridiculous. But at this stage, this is the best amulet that you can use. Now, as you're leveling up, there is one called the Anvil as well, and the Anvil will be a good leveling amulet to use, but only until about 28. And in fact, I don't think you can use it until about then. If you can get your hands on this, do it. These are only at this stage about 15C to 30C, so they're pretty good and cost effective. Next of all, our rings are what makes this build crazy. So we're using 2 Shaper Steel rings. Now, there is an argument to say that you only need one shaped steel ring, but you'll need something in the vicinity of a level 85 plus roll if you can get it. If you're using a standard shaped ring, because you want to try and get that physical damage to attacks roll to roll. But essentially, the first one I'll talk about, which you'll see in the POB, I actually have the craft for increased damage up to 20%, which is in 1 exalt damage roll. And then on top of that, I also have 3 crafted modifiers from the Pale Council as well. So I actually have a 19% increased damage roll on one of my shaped rings with a channeling skill of -2 to total mana, which is important because essentially this build doesn't work without reducing the channeling skill cost. Second to that, the second shaper ring, which is actually, it was worth 6 exalt, is shaped, has an all resist modifier on it, or roll, which is quite significant. Now the physical damage to attacks is not great, but it's better than nothing. And then also what makes this ring significant are 2 key things, is channeling skills have -3 to total mana cost, which is huge, and also curse enemies with level 8 Assassin's Mark on hit, which is pretty much critical to this build working. Now there is a notable that lets you accumulate power charges on block, which is an alternative, and I think in the last video that I posted that's in that POB. But if you can get a ring with curse enemies with level 8 Assassin's Mark or any sort of Assassin's Mark level, that's where you pretty much want to be, and that's the perfect ring for this build at this stage at pure endgame. So for our jewels, and you'll see in the POB, there's a little bit going on here, and maybe one of the first things we'll talk about are the cluster jewels that I actually use in this build. So essentially, and I'll just pull it up on the screen. The cluster jewels that I use, there is one large cluster jewel, and now you'll need to have 2 jewel socket passives for this, and this will need to run Iron Breaker and Force Multiplier, and this is going to give you increased physical damage essentially. Iron Breaker is good for reducing enemy resistance to physical damage, and Force Multiplier is essentially just flat, straight up fuck off damage, which is what you need. Now, the other things that you'll need to get this working is basics of is another small cluster jewel, which if you can get you'll need 2 of these, and whatever roll combination you want to get is up to you. But you'll need basics of pain, precise retaliation, and confident combatant. Now, confident combatant is significant because it gives you 1% increased damage based on whatever attack block chance that you have. Now we're going to have 79% block chance, which means that's going to give you a 79% increase to damage, and that essentially is really awesome. Now if you can get these with 2 passive sockets, that's pretty much where you want to be, and that will minimize the waste on those travel sockets within the cluster jewels. Now the other 2 things that you'll need will be an intuitive leap jewel, and this is how we're going to get our leech working, and I'll show you in the path of, or when we get to the tree, how we get this to work. And also a split personality, and this is going to let us buff up our intelligence nodes on our pathing so that we can essentially run no mana modifiers on our tree, but have just enough mana to be able to sustain a cost of 1 mana in being able to run Cyclone constantly, and also with a little bit of regen. Now you'll see in the POB there's a few other gems that I'm using as well. There will be one gem, Viridian Jewel, that has Corrupted Blood cannot be inflicted on you. This is obviously so we can take down Cyrus. I've also got 1 mana gain from each enemy hit by your attacks. Now, mana sustainability in this build is a bit shitty. You're going to have to work with it. I've got it working perfectly now, but it took a bit of tinkering. The other thing that you also need to basically look for on your jewels will be critical strike multiplier and damage while holding shield, and also claw damage will also give you quite a significant amount of damage as well. That's essentially where you need to be with your jewel kit outs. So for your flasks, you're going to be wanting to run a Quicksilver flask. Now it doesn't really matter what modifiers you get on this as long as it works for the way that you play. You'll want a Rumi's concoction as well, and this is going to give you block chance, max out your block chance before you even start hitting enemies. You'll want a Lion's Roar. This is going to increase your damage, and you'll want a Blood of the Karui, which is going to give you a lot more sustainability and life recovery. So for gem setup, in your helm you're going to be running a Val Molten Shell, Blood Rage, and Custom Damage Taken. Now you can sub out and run an Immortal Call, level 1 Immortal Call, level 1 Blood Rage, and level 1 Custom Damage Taken, and trigger Val Molten Shell when you want it. In your chest you're going to be running Val Cyclone, Rage, Brutality, Fortify, Maim, and Impale. Now you want to try and get level 21 where possible for any of these, and if you can get Awakened Gems that's even better. Boots, Ancestral War Chief, Dash, and Second Win. Gloves, you're going to want to run Flesh and Stone, Enlightened Precision, and Herald of Purity. And in your shield, you're going to be running Melee Physical Damage, Pulverize, and Brutality. Now, when you run Flesh and Stone, you will need to switch between your Sand Stance and your Blood Stance. On bosses, your Blood Stance will let you accumulate Challenger charges. And when you're in Sand Stance and doing mapping, that'll increase your Challenger charges in that situation when you kill enemies, and that's quite significant. Precision is the best gem to level up to 20 for this, as opposed to running banners as well. And quickly, pros and cons of this build are really quick farmer for T16s, or relatively quick. It's pretty tanky, block is friggin' awesome, and you can go head to head with most bosses, and Reckoning is a dope skill. Now, it's expensive as fuck to balance. Physical Reflect you can't do. You can't do it Siri because of Physical Reflect, and Chaos and Dot are essentially the worst enemy of this build in existence. Aside from that, you're pretty cool otherwise. Okay, so let's talk build trees. So, essentially, we're going to start as the duelist, because obviously we're playing a gladiator. Now, the build tree for here is essentially we're going to follow down and get these physical attack nodes down to Master of the Arena. Then we're going to go across and we're going to get Bravery to Art of the Gladiator. Next we'll go down, we'll pick up Defiance, and we'll follow these nodes down, pick up our jewel socket here, follow these nodes down from Golem's Blood downwards, and we're going to pick up Tetsudo, and we're going to pick up Retaliation. This is going to increase our block chance from the get-go, and is also going to give us mana gain when blocking, and also increase defenses and attack while holding a shield and whatnot. So this is important. This is the first part of our leveling up. Nextly, we'll get to this lastly. We'll worry about this last. So nextly, we're going to come to the left, and we're going to go down. We're going to pick up this Hard Knocks Intelligence node because we're a bit dumb, so we need to get smart. Then we're going to pick up Dismembering, and this is going to give us increased critical strike multiplier, crit chance, and it's going to give us 20% to maim enemies when we crit as well. Then we want to come up and we want to pick up Bloodless, and that's going to start us off getting some health build up. Now this build is not very health centric, you only need 4,000 to make it work, but we still want to have 4,000 health at the end of the day. Next we'll move to the left and we'll pick up Eagle Eye. This is going to give us increased accuracy, and we can see here chance to hit currently with Reckoning is 99%, rounded up to 100%, so it's pretty good. This is also going to give us, I believe, crit chance and accuracy, which is all we need. So then we're going to come to the left, and we're going to pick up Warrior's Blood. We're going to go up, we're going to pick up Heart of the Warrior, and we're going to pick up Born to Fight. That's going to give us melee physical damage, and that's going to give us health as well. Now we do want to pick up Versatility and the two accompanying nodes around. That's going to give us increased accuracy and increased crit chance as well. Now moving to the left, we want to pick up Elemental Resistance. Diamond Skin, this is going to give us more elemental resistance and help us get closer to that cap, which we can see down here. And then we're going to pick up Solidarity to increase our block chance. We're going to come across and pick up Juggernaut, and then go straight down and pick up Aggressive Bastion. And this is going to increase our block chance and also give us a chance to accumulate endurance charges on kill while holding a shield, which is going to give us increased defense even further. Now we'll come up, we'll pick up our next jewel socket. This will just be a generic one. Whatever you want to stick here is whatever you stick here. Then we'll come right up, we'll pick up Disembowelment. This is going to give us increased critical strike chance and melee crit strike multiplier. As you can see, I've picked up all the nodes here. We want as much as we can. Then we're going to come across, we'll get to this last. Then we'll go to the right. We're going to pick up Tireless. This is going to reduce our mana cost and also increase health, and then Sanctuary. And this will essentially cap out our block chance at this stage. Now, We're going to move here and we're going to look at this first large cluster jewel that I've got here, which uses Iron Breaker and Force Multiplier. Now, for whatever reason, this jewel is fudged up in the POB, but essentially Force Multiplier gives us a 5% chance to do double damage, which is awesome. Iron Breaker gives us 35% increased physical damage, and also gives enemies a reduced 10% to physical damage reduction, which is awesome. So, and this is this Confident Combatant node, that the first one that we're going to socket in, and ideally if you can get this first, it's the best way to go. It's giving us, based on the POB here, 10% of our Reckoning damage currently, which is 127,000 damage. Now, it does 1% increased damage per 1% of block chance. We do 79% block chance. Do the math, 79% damage straight away from that one node, which is awesome. Then we're going to come up and we're going to look at Precise Retaliation, which is going to give us 40% increased crit multiplier if you block recently. Now, 79% of the time we're going to be blocking at every 0.27 seconds. So also doing math again, we're essentially going to be sitting at that 40% in critical strike multiplier constantly. And for whatever reason, if we haven't blocked recently, we're going to do 80% increased crit chance, which is going to proc on our Cyclone. So we're at one way or another, we're going to do stupid amounts of crit with this node. So it's quite a good node. Second to that, Basics of Pain. This is just 20% increased flat damage, 30% increased critical strike chance. Now, arguably, you could probably switch this out for something else if you can find something else that's just as good. This is somewhat generic. It only gives us 63,000 average damage, which is pretty good, but it does give us 2.4% effective crit chance, which is quite significant. Now we get to our individual jewels that we're socketing in here, our two unique jewels. So, Split Personality. This is going to give you 25% increased effect per allocated passive tree, allocated passives between the skill tree and your class's starting location. What that means is every node that is a passive, a skill passive, or what do we want to go here? Allocated passive skill. It's going to give us 25% on that pathing, and I believe this follows the path of, so if this is 10, it's going to be 12.5, for example. And then basically it's going to follow this trail all the way back to our starting node here, which is going to increase our intelligence and whatnot. This is actually the reason why we can run this build with essentially no mana nodes. Originally I had played with running mana nodes down here to sustain, or here to sustain. With Split Personality, there's no need to run mana jewels, which is fantastic. It also gives us 40% increased accuracy rating, which is what we need. Accuracy means we hit our target and we crit. And 5 to maximum mana. Because we're a bit shit with mana, this gives us that supplement to mana that we need to keep going. Now, the other unique jewel that we're running here is the Intuitive Leap jewel. Now, this one's quite cheap. I got a corrupted one that has 5% increased damage. Now, with this one, essentially this lets us pick any socket within this radius that isn't connected, any notable that isn't connected. Now, in this case, we can get Berserking, which gives us 6.1% increased total attack speed, which is fantastic. Scalable across the entire build, of course. And the key one here is Martial Experience. Now, normally this node would apply to physical damage with two-handers, but we're not actually interested in that. We're actually interested in the last three items of this, which says 0.8% of physical attack damage is leached as life, 50% increased total recovery per second while from life leeching, and then enemies have negative 12% to total physical damage reduction against your hits. This essentially means that our leech life per hit, essentially this is giving us 201.1 life leech per hit, which is quite good. And this is what's going to keep us alive and synergize with our Reckoning's 250 life on hit based on our Surrender Shield. So essentially, this is giving us life. And on top of that, we're running Assassin's Mark, so we're also getting life on kill and mana on kill as well, which essentially makes us quite sustainable in mapping. And as you would have seen in the starting footage, my life doesn't really dip down too far, and when it does, it gets up back to top pretty quickly. Now, the caveat to this is obviously degen messes this build up. Dot is not good for the health of this build. Dot is pretty much its kryptonite. and chaos damage is a bit nasty as well. It can fail in the worst possible time as well, when your block doesn't proc. Obviously you don't have 100% block, so you have to expect that you're going to get hit at some stage, but we have to trust that our other mitigators, such as our crab barriers or aspect of the crab, will kick in and keep us alive in that circumstance. But essentially, and as we can see, 90% physical damage reduction as well. Now this build moves at about 140%, which is quite fast. That's with 10 challenger charges, and that's what we'll talk about next. So our ascendancy will be the Gladiator. Now when you're leveling up, the first thing you want to pick is Painforged. Then you want to, on your second run through lab, you want to get Versatile Combatant. This is going to match your spell block to your attack block, so that all you have to do is max out your attack block, and that's it. And then we want to get Violent Retaliation. This is going to increase our cap to 79% for block chance. And essentially it's going to buff your damage as well, and also it's going to give you attack damage for each time you've blocked in the last 10 seconds, which is quite good. And lastly, which is going to give us our clear speed, you're going to get Arena Challenger, which is going to give you 2% attack and movement speed per challenger charge, and this will cycle obviously when you move between Sand Stance and Blood Stance, and you'll get 10 of these charges. So, you know, 20% movement and attack speed is quite good. Now, this is pretty much the build tree for this build. I'll put this build tree in the POB. But yeah, essentially it's quite simple. It's very sort of uniform in its little area. Now, where can you take this build? If you can figure out a way to make this build push up even further, get this to 2 mil DPS, I'm definitely going to try. I think it's possible to do it up to level 100. This is at level 92 currently, so there's 8 levels that can still be allocated out here. I'd probably suggest picking up, ideally, this Brink Marksmanship. That's going to give you increased damage. Maybe chuck it into some health if you want to get Forceful Skewering. Otherwise, if you can find a way to get more crit into this build, then that's what you want to do. You just want to target those crit nodes as much as possible. But yeah, that's pretty much the build guide as it is. That's the tree, and that's all you really need to know. I'll put it all in the description for you. So I hope this build guide helps you with getting your Reckoning build going, and also using crab armor and everything else. There'll be a link in the description to the POB. Feel free to put it in the comments, whatever you think, whether you think that this build is shit, go crazy. Yeah, basically, it's not a bad build. It's very efficient. I am making most of my currency from mapping with this build. What I've found is fast mappers are ideally the easiest way to make exalts in this game, at least at this stage of this league. This league is incredibly profitable. So, yeah. Aside from that, I'm going to look at maybe loading up some Last Epoch over the coming week or so. Obviously, we've got 2 months left of this league. So yeah, we'll see. I might post something up if people want to see me play that. Then yeah, there'll be maybe a few videos of that, or maybe of Inquisitor Martyr. I'm just looking at playing a couple of other different things, learning a few more games. But yeah, I am looking at doing another build as well. I'm going to run a dual Poet's Pen spellcaster build, so there'll be somewhat of a progress up for that. And I've also got a couple of videos in mind for helping people learn how to make currency from mapping and how to do some maps and stuff like that. So yeah, there'll be some more stuff coming up in the coming weeks. And yeah, I guess if you want to tune into my live stream as well, I'm trying to live stream more as well. So yeah, watch this space. Anyway, until next time, have a good one.